And so world comes to pass then, and that world comes to pass as world, that the thing things. This is the distant advent of the coming to presence of being itself. And so if you've read the essay on the thing, or you've seen my video discussion of it, then you know what he's talking about by the thing thinging. The thing things in an authentic mode, when it's not hijacked and put into a phase space, an abstract, objective phase space by science, or pushed aside by the consumer society and replaced with mass-produced cheap plastic substitutes, but instead, which are mere objects void of all meaning. The authentic thing is the handmade thing, the thing that is local, that nears the near and gathers the gods. And remember in the essay on the thing that he had said that the jug that's sitting on the table is an example of an authentic thing that gathers the fourfold. In pouring out its liquid, the liquid has come from the earth, so it gathers the earth, and that liquid at some point fell from the sky, so it gathers the sky and the earth, and through the pouring from man gathers the mortals, and in offering up in certain rituals to divinities, it gathers the fourfold, the divinities. So earth and sky, mortals and divinities are gathered in the authentic thing, which then things and nears. And in nearing, in thinging, it worlds. It's part of a world of meaning and significance, not cheap plastic trash. This is the opposite of a Walmart world. The self-denying of the truth of being, which entraps itself with oblivion, harbors the favor, as yet ungranted, that this self-entrapping will turn about. So the seed for what is to come is within the actual catastrophe itself. Catastrophes do tend to act as the fulcrum for moving events along on the stage of world history, but they tend to contain the saving power within them, just as the catastrophes say of the swamping of the barbarians, coming over the Limeys and destroying classical civilization, also contained within it the seed, the saving power of what would come out of that, namely the world of North Atlantic civilization, which would be the rebirth of the classical civilization. So in such turning, oblivion will turn and become the safekeeping belonging to the coming to presence of being, instead of allowing that coming to presence to fall into disguise. In the coming to presence of the danger, there comes to presence and dwells a favor, namely the favor of the turning about of the oblivion of being into the truth of being. So it will reveal itself authentically in this, once this turning has taken place, and he's beginning to see the lineaments of this process of turning. In the coming to presence of the danger, where it is as the danger, is the turning about into the safekeeping. Is this safekeeping itself is the saving power of being. His idea here that in framing has obscured being, and that being is still sort of underneath and behind it, flickering and pulsing, waiting for the right historical moment to manifest itself, reminds me of Spengler's concept in The Decline of the West of what he calls the pseudomorphosis. He says that when you look at the classical civilization as it was decaying in the Roman period, with the rise of a new civilization, what he calls the Magian, which is the Levantine civilization of the Judeo-Christian, Islamic, Zoroastrian civilization that was coming into being from out of this ancient dying classical world, because the form language of that classical world lay so heavily over the land of Palestine, there was so much of it and it was so thick and so heavy that the newborn culture could not find its own unique expression forms to express itself, and so as a result of that impoverishment was forced to express itself through the old form language of the dying civilization. This is why he says that the Pantheon that the Romans built is the first mosque. It already announces this new cosmology of the world as a cosmic cavern that's completely alien to the Greek and Roman understanding of the cosmos. Their buildings never had much in the way of interiors. They're almost entirely exterior. With the Pantheon, we have a singularity, a totally new sense of world that comes in at that time, a sense of the world as a cave. And at the same time that this is going on, we notice that in the statues have holes drilled into the pupils of the eyes, whereas all the statues and all of Greek and Roman art before that were solid, because body was the essence for that classical civilization. And with the holes drilled into the eyes, we have the penetration of the pneuma, the spirit, into the soul, the psyche that receives the penetration of the pneuma. That's a new idea that belongs to a new culture, but it's forced to express itself through the conceptual verbiage of Greek philosophy. So the understanding of being, in that case, it wasn't in framing that was concealing it. It was another culture concealing a nascent culture that was trying to come into being from out of these heavy expression forms that were covering it, and that the Magian culture did not come into full, valid, authentic expression until the coming of Islam. in which, and the fervor of Islam, its fury and its rampant conquest is accounted for by this finally releasing itself from Hellenistic culture forms. Somewhat similar here, what he's talking about within framing and this authentic being that's been covered up and that's waiting to come forth and manifest itself. So when the turning comes to pass and the danger, this can happen only without mediation. For being has no equal whatever. It is not brought about by anything else, nor does it itself bring anything about. Being never at any time runs its course within a cause-effect coherence. And this is what I mean by saying that in Heidegger, being feels very much like a God idea. It's beyond the realm of causality. Cause and effect is merely the phenomenal realm. And here he's saying it's not determined by any kind of mere causality. Being is more mysterious than that. It functions as a God idea for him, I think. Even though he might not himself admit that, and I don't think Heidegger scholars would admit it either, but it functions in a way that's analogous. Nothing that affects as being precedes the mode in which it, being itself, takes place so as to adapt itself. And no effect as being follows after. Sheerly out of its own essence of concealedness, being brings itself to pass into its epoch. Therefore we must pay heed. The turning of the danger comes to pass suddenly. In this turning, the clearing belonging to the essence of being suddenly clears itself and lights up. The event when it happens will be sudden. The sudden self-lighting is the lightning flash. It brings itself into its own brightness, which it itself both brings along and brings in. When in the turning of the danger the truth of being flashes, the essence of being clears and lights itself up. Then the truth of the essence, the coming to presence of being, turns and enters in. So he's simply describing the morphology of the process by way of which being announces itself in a sudden flash in the mind of a poet or an artist, and then in the production of authentic culture forms. People just suddenly start doing things differently with a new cultural style, and it appears sort of all at once, is one way of looking at this passage. Toward where does in-turning bring itself to pass? Toward nowhere except into being itself, which is as yet coming to presence out of the oblivion of its truth. But this same being comes to presence as the coming to presence of technology. The coming to presence of technology is in framing. In-turning as the bringing to pass of the turning about of oblivion turns into that which now is the epoch of being. That which genuinely is in no way this or that particular being. What genuinely is, i.e., what expressly dwells and endures as present in the is uniquely being. Only being is, only in being and as being does that which the is names bring itself to pass. That which is being from out of its own essence. So being is that which, whenever we point to an object and we say that thing is, it's never the case that we're just saying it merely exists. It's always the case that a certain understanding of being lies behind the manifestation of this particular being that enables it to be intelligible to us in a certain way. So when we say that something is, we're always understanding its isness in a certain way that's been conditioned by a certain historically conditioned idea of being. To flash, in terms both of its derivation and of what it designates, is to glance. In the flashing glance, and as that glance, the essence, the coming to presence of being, enters into its own emitting of light. Where he's got this idea of the clearing when truth happens. It's very much analogous to moving out into this clearing in a forest, where the unconcealment process happens. Here he's describing it as an historical epoch that comes in and begins to clear open a world space for itself. Moving through the element of its own shining, the flashing glance retrieves that which it catches sight of and brings it back into the brightness of its own looking. And yet that glancing, in its giving of light, simultaneously keeps safe the concealed darkness of its origin as the unlighted. So the new manifestations of being always come out of some obscure, murky depth of the forest that we don't know where it's coming from. It's only once it steps into the light and presents itself through unconcealing that it becomes visible to us, but its origins are mysterious. We have thought the truth of being in the worlding of world as the mirror play of the fourfold of sky and earth, mortals and divinities. That's the gathering together. When oblivion turns about, when world as the safekeeping of the coming to presence of being turns in, then there comes to pass the inflashing of world into the injurious neglect of the thing. And so you shift into a cultural mode in which things are mere objects. As, for example, in contemporary art today, most artists simply are producing worldless objects that have no significance, no meaning, no relationship to any set of ideas that makes them intelligible at all. They're just mere objects, pretty little objects and little toys. That's most of what happens in a worldless society when the world sphere has collapsed that gave the society meaning under the umbrella of a certain understanding of being. Then you have the abandonment of beings by being, and you get nihilism. That neglect comes to pass in the mode of the rule of inframing. Inflashing of world into inframing is inflashing of the truth of being into truthless being. It's inauthentic inframing. Inflashing is the disclosing coming to pass within being itself. Disclosing coming to pass, erignis, is bringing to sight that brings into its own. Now, this word erignis, which is translated here as disclosing coming to pass, is a key word in Heidegger, in the later Heidegger, and it simply means the happening of an event that is laden with significance. And so it's the rupture of a singularity that happens that is laden with meaning and significance. It's not some random thing. Insight into that which is, this designation now names the disclosing that brings into its own, that is the coming to pass of the turning within being, of the turning of the denial of being's coming to presence into the disclosing coming to pass of being's safekeeping. Insight into that which is itself the disclosing that brings into its own, as which the truth of being relates itself and stands in relation to truthless being. Insight into that which is, this names the constellation and the essence of being. This constellation is the dimension in which being comes to presence as the danger. And what I want to do is just skip to the last couple of paragraphs here. That is the gist of the essay. And in the last couple of paragraphs, just to skip down to them, he says, all that is merely technological never arrives at the essence of technology. It cannot even once recognize its outer precincts. Therefore, as we seek to give utterance to insight into that which is, we do not describe the situation of our time. It is the constellation of being that is uttering itself to us. But we do not yet hear, we whose hearing and seeing are perishing through radio and film under the rule of technology. And so, as Paul Virilio says, the vision machine now does all our seeing for us. And you might also say the hearing machines of radio and the various audio-acoustic phenomena do our hearing for us, thus further divorcing us from an authentic relationship to being. The constellation of being is the denial of world in the form of injurious neglect of the thing. Denial is not nothing. It is the highest mystery of being within the rule of inframing. That's what's happening on the stage now with inframing. Whether the God lives or remains dead is not decided by the religiosity of men, and even less by the theological aspirations of philosophy and natural science. Whether or not God is God comes disclosingly to pass from out of and within the constellation of being. So long as we do not, through thinking, experience what is, we can never belong to what will be. Will insight into that which is bring itself disclosingly to pass? And so he says we're at a crossroads here. It's not absolutely determined which way things are going to go, whether we're going to arrive at an authentic new relationship to being with the advent of a new cultural epoch that surmounts inframing and the entrapping of meaning and the oblivion of being by inframing, or whether this is simply going to continue. Will we, as the ones caught sight of, be so brought home into the essential glance of being that we will no longer elude it? Will we arrive thereby within the essence of the nearness that in thinging the thing brings world near? Will we dwell as those at home in nearness, so that we will belong primarily within the fourfold of sky and earth, mortals and divinities? Will insight into that which is bring itself disclosingly to pass? Will we correspond to that insight through a looking that looks into the essence of technology and becomes aware of being itself within it? Will we see the lightning flash of being in the essence of technology, the flash that comes out of stillness as stillness itself? Stillness stills. What does it still? It stills being into the coming to presence of world. May world in its worlding be the nearest of all nearing that nears, as it brings the truth of being near to man's essence, and so gives man to belong to the disclosing, bringing to pass, that is a bringing into its own. And that last paragraph sounds almost like a prayer, like a benediction. May world in its worlding come to pass as it brings the truth of being into manifestation. And so I wanted to, it's a little bit tedious, I know, to sit here and read through an essay of Heidegger's, but I wanted to demonstrate that it, far from being unintelligible, Heidegger is very intelligible. If you sit with it and you work through it, and you can see every sentence is very clear once you understand what the connotations of the words are, and especially this concept of the turning, which is the closest, what I wanted to demonstrate is that this is the closest that Heidegger comes to a kind of soteriology in which he expects the advent of a God being of some sort that will come down and shift us into another epoch. And whether he understands this as a metaphor, as I think the scholars would say, or whether he does in fact mean the advent of a new religion, in which he says only a God can save us, is, I think, debatable. I tend to think that he does indeed mean that a new God will come forth, or the gods will come forth out of concealment, unconceal themselves, and move us on into a new age in which we are not so dominated by technology as mere infringement.